Helen Johnson woke up as usual at 7 in the morning. She made coffee, opened the newspaper, and watched the sunrise from her window. Her home in small-town Ohio was cozy and filled with memories, pictures of her children, grandchildren, and of course the many pictures of her and Henry, her husband of 60 years. But this morning her peace was shattered by a phone call. "Helen, we need to talk," Henry said as they sat down at the kitchen table. He spoke clearly and confidently. "I can't live like this anymore. I want a divorce." Henry's words hit Helen like a bolt from the blue. She couldn't believe it. "What are you talking about, Henry? We've been together all our lives. Why now? What happened?" Henry didn't answer right away. His eyes avoided hers. Helen, I just feel like it's time for us to live apart. I want a different life." Helen remained sitting at the table. Her thoughts swarmed in her head. She remembered all the years they had spent together, their first meeting, building their home, having children, traveling together. How could this happen after all that? The news came as a blow to her. Helen felt like everything she knew and valued was crumbling. Helen spent the day after the news of the divorce in complete silence. Her thoughts were chaotic. Her heart was heavy. She tried to understand what exactly had happened. And Henry was her life partner, her support, and her best friend. How could he have ruined all that? That evening, Helen decided to talk to him. "Henry, I deserve to know the truth. Why do you want to leave after all these years?" She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Henry was silent for a long time and then sighing. "Helen, I know it sounds cruel, but I'm tired. All this time I have lived for others, for you, for our children. And now that I don't have much time left, I want to live for myself." Helen could not believe her ears. "Live for yourself? What about me? What about us? Doesn't everything we've been through together mean anything?" Henry looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something new, indifference. "It doesn't mean I don't value our life, but I don't feel part of this marriage anymore. It seems to me that we have long been just neighbors." Henry's words hurt Helen. She remembered they had built their home together, how they had gone through difficulties, how they had supported each other in the most difficult moments. "Neighbors," she whispered. "I want her." Henry nodding. "Yes, I want to live differently, Helen. I need something new before it's too late." The conversation left Helen in a state of shock. She felt like her world was falling apart. But at the same time, she began to wonder if their marriage had really been as perfect as she had thought. In the days that followed, she began to recall moments she had previously ignoring, how Henry had become cold and distant after his retirement, how they talked less and less. She also realized that she had been avoiding conflict herself, and when she was used to thinking everything was fine, even when it wasn't. One evening, while looking through old photo albums, Helen came across a picture of her and Henry standing, smiling in front of their first house. And it was their first accomplishment together. Where did that joy go? She thought. She began to realize that their marriage had long since become a formality, but she never thought it would lead to divorce. After the conversation with Henry, Helen's house began to feel foreign to her. Every corner reminded her of their life together, the photos on the walls, Henry's favorite chair by the window, even his scent still in the air. But now it all hurt. One morning, as Helen was making coffee, she realized she was only making one cup. Her hand was shaking and her eyes were filled with tears. "How could he leave me after 60 years? She repeated to herself. She began to avoid calls from friends and neighbors. She was ashamed to tell them that her marriage, which everyone considered a model, had broken down. When a neighbor, Mrs. Grant, called, Helen said she was busy, but in fact she was just sitting in the kitchen looking out the window. "What are they going to think? What did I do wrong?" she thought. At the same time, Helen felt anger like she had never known before. 60 years of giving him everything, and he decides it doesn't matter anymore. She recalled how she had supported Henry when he lost his job, how she had helped him cope with crisis, how she had cared for him after his heart surgery. And now, when I need support, he just walks away, she thought bitterly. One evening, Helen decided to look through their financial documents. She found the property division papers that Henry had left for her to sign. It was another belong. Her home, the place where she had lived all her life, was now part of the arrangement. "He wants to take even that," she exclaimed, throwing the papers to the floor. Helen remembered how they had built this house together, how they had painted the walls themselves, how they had planted roses in the garden. Every corner of this house had memories that now seemed lost. The days passed slowly. The loneliness became more and more difficult. One day, sitting by the window, Helen saw a young couple walking down the street holding hands. This caused her to feel a wave of sadness, but also reflection. Was I really happy in our marriage, or was I just used to the way things were? She began to review her memories. At first they were happy, but then everything changed. She realized that for many years, she and Henry had been living next door to each other, but not together. Their conversations became shorter and shorter, and their attention to each other disappeared. Helen's anger gradually gave way to a sense of loss. Helen felt that she had lost not only her husband, but also herself. Who am I now? I was a wife, a mother, a grandmother. And now, what am I going to do? This question became a turning point. She realized that her life was not over. Helen decided that she had to find a new meaning. One morning, when she woke up earlier than usual, Helen decided that she was done feeling sorry for herself. She went to the mirror and said, I have lived 60 years for others. Now it's time to live for myself. The first step was a trip to the city. Helen decided to do something she had long avoided, visit the coffee shop where she and Henry used to have coffee every Sunday. She went inside, but this time the feeling was different. She ordered a cappuccino and sat down by the window. Her attention was drawn to a group of people laughing loudly. It was a group of elderly women who seemed to be having a good time. They look happy. I want to feel that too, Helen thought. A few days later, she came across an ad in the newspaper about a club for active retirees. They organized painting classes, trips, and even dance lessons. Helen decided to give it a try. At the first meeting, she felt a little awkward. There were many strangers in the room, but their smiles were warm. Welcome, I'm Marge, the club leader. It's nice to see a new face, said one of the women. Helen chose a painting class. She had never held a paintbrush before, but she felt her soul come alive with each stroke of paint. She created a painting depicting an old house with a rose garden, her own home, which was a symbol of love and the past for her. That's wonderful, Helen, said Marge. These words filled her with pride. She realized that she was capable of creating something beautiful even now. The next step was to travel. The club was organizing a trip to a neighboring state to visit vineyards. Helen was hesitant about going, but finally decided to go. The trip turned out to be wonderful. She met a man named Richard who had also recently gone through a divorce. They got to talking, and Helen felt like she could be herself for the first time in a long time. Even life gives us new chances, even when we don't expect it, Richard said as they stood by the vineyard watching the sunset. These words made Helen think. Perhaps her life was not over, but just beginning. When she returned home, Helen decided to sign up for dance lessons that the club also offered. Dancing became another discovery for her. Movement, music, new acquaintances, all this filled her with energy she hadn't felt in a long time. She also started spending more time with her friends. Mrs. Grant, her neighbor, suggested that they attend cooking classes together. Helen, you have no idea how much you've changed. You look happier, Mrs. Grant once said. I just decided that my life belongs to me, and it's the best decision I've made in years, Helen replied. Act step by step, Helen felt herself finding herself again. She realized that there were still many possibilities in her life, and that she could be happy even if she was alone. Several months passed since Helen and Henry broke up. Helen was no longer the broken woman who was left alone in her home. Her days were filled with new activities, new friends, and even small pleasures that she had once considered unimportant. However, no matter how far she had progressed, the memories of her 60 years of marriage still kept her in the past. One day she received a letter. It was from Henry. Dear Helen, I know I left you at a very difficult time, and I realize you must still be angry with me, but I want to talk. Maybe we can understand each other better than we did before. Always yours, Henry. Helen held the letter in her hands for a long time. She hesitated whether to answer. Was she ready to see the man who had caused her so much pain? In the end, she decided to meet him. They agreed to meet in the park where they used to walk together. It was their favorite place when they were young, and now Helen hoped that this meeting would her find answers to her questions. When Henry arrived, he looked older and more tired than Helen remembered. His eyes, which had once been full of determination, now looked sad. "Hello, Helen," he said as he sat down on the bench next to her. "Oh, hi, Henry," she replied, keeping her hands in her lap, trying not to show her emotions. They were silent for a long time, watching the autumn leaves spin in the air. Finally, Henry spoke up. "Helen, I know I've ruined everything we had, but I want you to know that it wasn't because of you. It was because of me." Helen looked at him, then explained. "Henry, why? Why did you leave?" Henry sighed. "I felt that our life had become a routine. I saw us growing apart more and more. But instead of trying to fix it, I just gave up. I thought I would find happiness if I started from scratch. But now I realize that I lost much more than I gained." Henry's words caused Helen to have mixed feelings. She felt anger at his weakness, but also compassion for his honesty. "You could have talked to me, Henry. We could have found a solution together," she said. Henry lowered his head. "I know, but I was afraid. I thought you would be as disappointed in me as I was." Helen thought about it. As she remembered how often she had avoided serious conversations, thinking that everything would work itself out. She realized that it wasn't just Henry who had destroyed their marriage, but also her unwillingness to see the problems. "We're both to blame, Henry," she finally said. He looked up, surprised by her words. "But it doesn't matter anymore. We both made our choices, and now I'm living a different life. I have found something in it that I have never searched for before myself." Henry smiled. "I'm happy for you, Helen. You have always been strong, more than I ever could have imagined." They talked some more, reminiscing about old times, but this time without bitterness. As they said goodbye, Helen felt a sense of peace in her heart. "Thank you for meeting me, Henry. I think we both got what we were looking for," she said. "Thank you, Helen. Take care," he replied. This meeting was an important step for Helen to put the past behind her. She realized that forgiveness is not a weakness, but a strength. The meeting with Henry left Helen with a sense of lightness. She was finally able to forgive him and herself for the mistakes they had made in their marriage. It was an important step towards the freedom she had been seeking for so long without even realizing it. The following weeks were a time of great change for Helen, as she decided to focus on building a new life that would have no room for regrets. One day, she came across an ad in the local newspaper. "Senior Travel Club looking for new members." It seemed like the perfect opportunity. Helen had always dreamed of seeing more of the world, but in their marriage, Henry was not a big fan of travel. She signed up for a trip to Yosemite National Park. When the day of the trip arrived, Helen felt an excitement she hadn't known in a long time. She was standing by the bus when a woman about her age approached her. "Are you new?" "I'm Marion," she said, smiling. "Yes, I'm Helen. Nice to meet you," she replied. The trip was unforgettable. They walked among the huge trees, listened to the sound of waterfalls, and shared stories from their lives. Helen felt that the world was opening up to her again. Marion, who quickly became her friend, suggested organizing another trip, but this time abroad. "What if we went to Italy? They say it's incredibly beautiful there," she suggested. Helen smiled. "Why not? I'm ready for an adventure." It was just the beginning of a new life. Helen discovered that the world was full of possibilities. She started taking photography lessons to capture the moments that now filled her days. However, the biggest change was felt in her inner world. She was no longer afraid of loneliness, because she realized that being alone does not mean being lonely. One day, while walking in the park, she met Richard, a man she had met on a trip to the vineyards. "Helen, I didn't think I'd see you again," he said as he came closer. "Richard, it's so good to see you. How are you?" They began a conversation that lasted several hours. Richard told him how he had also been searching for himself after his divorce, and they realized they had a lot in common. At a meeting, Richard was another proof for Helen that life can give new opportunities even when it seems that everything is lost. Helen is standing on a hilltop in Italy, looking at the sunset. She is holding a camera and taking a picture. "And this is my life, and I'm ready to live it to the fullest," she says, smiling. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Here we tell real-life stories that prove that happiness is always around. Your support helps us to create more such stories.